book of 1 Corinthians, Paul has addressed sexual immorality a number of times. He's addressing problems that were going on in the church, and he's answering questions that the Corinthian church had for him. And one of the major problems they had was that there was a man living in an incestuous relationship with his mother-in-law at the church. And so, or his stepmother, and they were not correcting it. So that opened up a whole discussion about sin and sexual immorality, and we've discussed it in chapter 5, we've discussed it in chapter 6 a couple times, and I even have said to some people as we've been going through this, I'm kind of tired of talking about sexual immorality on Sunday morning, but the reason we're doing it is because it's in the Bible, and the Lord talks about it a lot, and if we're going to be honest with each other, we talk about it a lot outside of church. And so we need to make sure that we can address the matters that are very important according to the Word of God. So we're going to be talking about today not just the wrong things that were going on, but what the prescription is for the solution. You probably have noticed that our internet feeds today are filled with claims and counterclaims about proper sexual behavior. Have you noticed? About what is and is not good for marriage and is not a good way to date. And people, for some reason, love to air their dirty laundry about here's all the terrible things I do to my husband and here's all the ways that I manipulate my girl and I'm going to post it on the internet for everybody to see. And so we're in an era where we're sort of, praise God, coming out of this hyper-homosexual, hyper-transgender, even hyper-feminist time. That all is kind of passing away. And in the gap, there's a big discussion being had about, okay, well, what do we do instead? And there's been more heat than light generated in those discussions, in my opinion, because we have all of these ideas that are contradicted by other ideas that we have that cannot be resolved. For example, and I'm not speaking about this church here, I'm speaking about our culture, America today. We insist on the right to do whatever we want with our bodies, and yet we get angry when we come across somebody who is disloyal to us with their body. We insist that we can be promiscuous and immodest and dress however we want and sleep around as much as we want, and yet when I'm ready for a family, that everybody else better shape up and give me what I'm asking for. We praise faithfulness in marriage, and yet we insist on the right to divorce whenever we want or have an abortion whenever we want. So there's two things going on. There's a high value of proper godly marriage, and yet there is an insistence that I should be able to do whatever I want as long as I want, and stop whenever I want, and have everybody else come along with me whenever I want. It doesn't work that way. Now, the church has very little trouble marshaling biblical arguments against these things. It's not hard to preach a Bible study against something that is wrong. That's very easy to do. You get a bunch of verses together, you call out what's going on in the culture, and everybody says, amen. But what is more difficult is not just to point out what is wrong in the world, but to offer up a positive solution of how God would have us handle it. This is where this debate is being had, and I find it fascinating, even though it's not generally being done by Christians, where they're saying, okay, well, we don't want to have these weak, weird relationships. We want to get back to something that is more wholesome, but we can't agree on where we're going with this. And usually it's because the women want to have a situation where the men just stay put and they do whatever they want, and the guys want to have a situation where the ladies stay put and the guys do whatever they want, and fancy that, it doesn't work out very well. We have to be able to say, what are we aiming at so that we can understand the commandments that God has given? Because if you try to take the Bible's lessons on a certain issue, say, don't commit sexual immorality, don't commit fornication, for example, or, in marriage that you're supposed to be faithful to one another. If you're going to try to just take those commandments and import them into a godless context that doesn't really care what Jesus has to say about anything, but you're going to try to keep the rules about dating and marriage, it's going to be frustrating and it's going to be difficult. And you're going to get people to say things like, I tried and it didn't work for me. Or people that will say, even in the church, God help us, they think they're being, of the time or helpful to their kids, and they say this, like, I know what the Bible says, but we're not living in those days anymore, and you can't live that way. Well, especially and at least in the church, we need to be able to redefine our terms from the ground up of what we're aiming at, and then what it looks like when we all come together and have this discussion. The Lord said in Genesis 2:24 that a man shall leave his father and mother, hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. In a word, marriage is the solution to sexual immorality. But if we're going to have it as the solution to sexual immorality, we have to define marriage according to the Word of God, which, as the Bible says, a husband and wife come together, leave the previous family. Sometimes that's its own problem, isn't it? Hold fast to his wife in an emotional and emotional and relational union with one another, and they shall become one flesh, which involves that spiritual and sexual union between a husband and wife. So if we don't define marriage biblically, you can say get married and you're still going to have just as many problems. But if you look at what the Bible has to say about marriage and you define it that way, then I think we can all agree we're going to start to get somewhere. We were made by God. He knows how we work, and his answers are going to be our solutions to the problems that we face. So in chapter 7, we're going to look at verses 1 through 16 today. We're going to focus mostly on the first 5 verses, but it's all relevant and all ties together. Paul writes, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman." Literally there, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. "But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights." Literally, he should give to her what is owed to her. "And likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does." And all the feminists freaked out. "Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does." And all the alpha males freaked out. "Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer, but then come back together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Well, we open up a section, and this is the first example of it in 1 Corinthians, where Paul is addressing a question that had been directly asked him by the Corinthian church. We know of men, Achaicus, Fortunatus, and I think Stephanus was the other one, who brought the letter, or brought the news to Paul from a woman named Chloe, and reporting on the problems going on in the church, but also it seemed to have a few questions for him. And we discussed last time that a lot of the things Corinthians addresses are slogans, and it can be difficult to figure out, is this a slogan that the Corinthian church had in error? Is this something that Paul had said that they misunderstood? Or is this something new that Paul is saying right now? But I think in this case, it's pretty easy to see that they were saying things in the Corinthian church that it is good for a man not to touch a woman. They were arguing for the righteousness and the goodness of being celibate in the church. Now, Paul is going to affirm that, yes, this is a good thing, and yet he is going to make very clear, but it is not the only good thing, and it is not the better thing as compared to marriage and how that is to be worked. And he's also going to say that abstaining from sexuality is a good thing, but it is not a necessary thing. And here's the part we're going to focus on today. Abstinence from sex is not a godly thing when you are married. And that might seem obvious to you, but it wasn't so obvious to the Corinthian church. Let's paint a picture here. Let's say that they had come to church and there was a woman who had decided that she just loved Jesus so much that she said, "Husband, I have decided that in order to deny my flesh, I am never going to have sex ever again." Isn't that wonderful and glorifying to the Lord? That's a recipe for a very frustrated husband, is what that is. Ladies, imagine if your husband went off to the men's retreat and he comes back and he says, you say, "How was it?" He goes, "Oh, it was so great. The Lord spoke to me that I am too focused on my flesh and I'm being carnal, so I have promised and vowed to the Lord that I will never have sex ever again." That's a woman that's going to say, "You are never going to a men's retreat ever again. It's the only thing you're never going to do." And yet, can you hear how that can sound kind of spiritual? "I have denied myself even the greatest of gifts." And yet Paul said, no, you're not denying yourself anything. You're denying your husband or your wife something that they are owed by you. Not within marriage. This is one of the most practical sections on marriage in the entire New Testament. And yet I'm willing to bet most of you have never quite heard it taught plainly. Why? Well, because frankly, it's uncomfortable to talk about. You'll probably get more comfortable as we go along here today, but it is uncomfortable to discuss, partly because we hear it and we go, "Oh, that's kind of private, that's kind of personal." And it is. And yet the Word of God knows how important this issue is. That it's going to tell us you cannot ignore this and think that you're going to be able to fix your marriage. We read about on Wednesday night when Elijah was depressed and suicidal and asking God to take his life. And the Lord was going to show him some amazing things. But what was the first thing God did when Elijah wanted his life to be taken? You were there. What did the first thing God did? He made him take a nap. And what was the second thing God did? He fed him. He said, "Elijah, you're tired and you're hungry. The first thing you need to do is you need to take a nap. Actually, take 2 naps and eat 2 meals. And then you'll be ready." In the same way, I have found that when most couples come to me for marriage counseling, this is a problem. They are not taking care of each other sexually, and they're trying to fix all these other problems that are just manifestations of the root problem. And it usually goes something like this. When I see them sniping and fighting at each other, I'll ask the question at some point. I'll say, how is your sexual relationship? And either he or her will say, which is code for, we don't have one. To which I will then say, okay, I will help you solve this argument. But until you solve that problem, we're not going to get anywhere with this. Because this is at the foundation of your relationship as a husband and wife. And that is not a carnal thing. It is a spiritual thing. It is the way that God created you. And if you're not going to solve that, you wonder why you're so irritable with one another. It's because you're not taking care of each other. A little too real for you? Well, just buckle in, friends. It's going to be like this all day. It's uncomfortable, but we must talk about it, because Paul's solution to the temptation to sexual immorality is that men and women should get married and give each other the proper outlet for their sexual drives and desires. Those drives and desires you have are not sinful. They can be applied in sinful directions, but that is the way that God made you. And not only did God make you that way, He gave you the ability to satisfy those drives and desires with the person that you love, your husband or your wife. And so how do we fight against temptation to various sexual sins? You need to be looking after one another in your marriage relationship. Now, I might need to correct this, because it is a very common misconception that the Lord really doesn't approve of sex. And if He did, it's grudging because, well, we have to have children. But, if there was some other way, I would have done it. Notice this, though. There could have been any other way, infinite other ways. We could have been like fruit on the trees, where your babies grow out of your elbows and they drop onto the ground. The Lord didn't do that. He created you, yes. You ever consider that? God created us this way on purpose. And the Bible is full of passages that tell us not to reluctantly and only ever for procreation to engage in sexuality with your husband or your wife, but to delight in that. Let me read Proverbs chapter 5, verses 15 through 19. Another awkward passage, maybe. You got to remember, this is Solomon writing to his son, and this chapter is all about teaching his son to avoid harlots, flirtatious women, and women who would try to seduce him away from his wife. So, ladies, you should appreciate this passage, because it's there to protect you and him as well, but you understand. But look at what he says. He uses the analogy of a well here, okay? He says, drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? That is, don't look for women on the streets. The Bible uses that analogy. Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breasts fill you at all times with delight and be intoxicated always in her love. That's pretty remarkable that that's in the Bible, isn't it? He says, I know that you're a young man and that you have a wandering eye, but I'm telling you, that is a shameful thing for you to do. You should be at home with your wife. If you want to be head over heels in love with somebody, be head over heels in love with your wife. If you want to admire the female form, admire your wife. In fact, the Bible instructs you to do that, to delight yourself not just in the companionship and the spiritual, the body and the physicality of your spouse. This can apply to women and men as well, you see. Be intoxicated always in her love. Remember that song? Maybe you don't. When I was growing up on the radio, I used to be love drunk. Well, the Bible actually uses that exact same analogy. It says, be intoxicated, be love drunk for your husband or your wife. And this is talking about the physical relationship, the sexual relationship between a husband and wife. God created sex, and in its place, it is wonderful and good. And Christian marriages are to delight in it. A godly Christian marriage is one that has a regular, satisfactory sexual relationship for both parties. Can I tell you this? That if you do not have this in your marriage, you have some work to do. Paul even draws equality here because the classic story you hear here is that there is a husband who is just starved, and meanwhile he feels like his wife is a sexual camel who can just go for her whole life and never needs this. But you know what? It goes both ways. He says, let the wife have her own husband, and the husband his own wife. Notice he uses those possessive words there, his own and her own, as in don't just go find anybody. You need to be with one another. And we know this in the church. However, It is a very common story that you see, that couples will come into the church and everything looks great, and they worship and they pray and they talk about Jesus, and they're always posting, a sunset with a dolphin jumping over the moon and a Bible verse on it on Facebook, and you think, oh, that's the kind of person I would be. And they're very free with their advice, and maybe it's even good advice for young men and women about how you should conduct yourselves as husband and wife. Meanwhile, both of them, or one of them, is silently seething towards the other one because their relationship has been sexless for years. And there are some that think, well, we've grown beyond that. No, you haven't. No, you have not. And if you think you have, you're setting yourself up for trouble. And it can be either person's fault. We'll address how this can go in a minute. It can be a husband that is neglecting his wife. It can be a wife that is neglecting her husband. But we can parade around like, well, that aspect of my life doesn't matter. I have a good marriage. We're just not connected there. No, you don't have a good marriage. You have a sham of a marriage. And in fact, one of you, probably at least, is aware of that. You're going to walk around here, everybody think that you're somebody, think that you're so great. Meanwhile, we go home and I never see you. You haven't touched me and I can't even remember when. And you're going to go around and give advice to people. Or maybe we even get beaten down in our own minds. I shouldn't want that so much. It's really all about, affection with one another. It's really all about kindness. No, it's not. It simply is not. I'm going to tell you this. If you are not looking after your spouse sexually in your marriage, if you are withholding yourself and keeping yourself from them, you are committing sexual immorality. You are withholding something that is owed to the person you married. You do not have the ability to deny that. It is a matter of temptation to sin. And it is really a shame how you hear stories where all of a sudden it seems, oh, that man just went crazy and went after some younger woman, or it turns out he's been addicted to pornography all this time, and then you come to find out his wife has been keeping herself from him for years. That doesn't make what he did right, but that doesn't make her some innocent victim. She was not doing what she needed to do to protect her husband. And many times you hear the same story where a husband and a wife are together and she's working and he's working and she ends up running off with somebody, and you say, how did this happen? Well, if he was not seeing to her and taking care of her like she needed, he is complicit in that sin. This is not healthy, godly Christian marriage where everything looks good and it's Hallmark Channel, Mayberry, everything looks fine, and there is no sexual relationship. And I'm saying it like this because I'm telling you, when people come in and they're having problems in their marriage and they can't get along and they can't figure this out, and why is she talking to this other guy, and why is he always on the internet? Why do we never talk anymore? And you bring this up and somebody says some excuse, but you can't have excuses. This is too important. This is the foundation of your relationship. You weren't even legally married until you consummated your relationship. And it is that action that the Bible says the Lord brought you together spiritually. Let me give a couple examples. I'm going to go back and forth between men and women, and I'm going to try to give as many common illustrations that I see in the church. And maybe some of them will stand out to you. But what can often happen? Here's a big one. Well, you get married and everything's great, then children come along. And then when the children come along, all of a sudden, there is a time where the relationship is not going to be like it was. But here's what can happen. So for men, and we're going to discuss this more in a little bit, the sex is less about, it is still, but it is less about that emotional attachment. For women, that is one of the biggest parts, and in fact, the biggest part for a lot of people is feeling affirmed and loved and attached to somebody. This has been seen in my life over and over again. I've seen this with people, and it's also been medically diagnosed, that when a woman has a baby especially, and is nursing the child and looking after that child all the time, she's getting her emotional connection needs met. This is why husbands get grumpy when their wives are nursing the babies. Oh, did that never happen? You've never seen that before in your life? Never encountered anything like that? This is why husbands say things like, she loves those kids more than me. Because this connection that we used to have, she gave up as soon as the kids came along. And there's nothing wrong with this, but there has to come a point where you need to be able to move past that. And yeah, when you have kids, it's not like it was when you were, just married and there was just the two of you in the house. You get kids that come into the bed from time to time because they have nightmares. And, you get, things that are happening around the house and you're just exhausted, want to fall asleep. But both of you need to see to it that you do not let this atrophy. You cannot let that happen. And can I just say this? Dads need to step up and tell their wives what they need to do more often in this situation. You feel bad because she's watching the baby. I understand. But you need to look to yourself and to protect her by protecting yourself and saying, darling, I love you so much, but that kid needs to sleep in a different room. Or you need to say, I love you so much, but you cannot keep putting me off like this. It's getting difficult to control myself. Now, that's hard to admit because it sounds like, or I'm going to leave you. That's not what it means. What it means is you're neglecting me, I'm feeling neglected, and there's something that you are not giving to me. This is not good. Or sometimes, to pick on the wives one more time before we pick on the fellas some, is a woman will become angry for some reason or another and deliberately withhold herself from her husband to punish him, to teach him a lesson. To say, well, I'm not going to be giving you this then until you learn to shape up. Which, do you know what that says? The husbands tend to prioritize the physical aspect of a relationship, and the wives tend to prioritize the emotional aspect of a relationship. So what you are saying is, until you give me what I want, I'm not going to give you what you want, because what I want is more important than what you want. Don't do that. Bible tells us right there, can we read it again? The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. That means, obviously, you can take this with a grain of salt. But that means you do not have the right to deny your spouse. It seems like it's been a lot lately. Take it as a compliment and say, all right, let's go again. You need to learn to do this. What about for the fellas? What can the fellas tend to do? Well, guys can start to drift away. They can get caught up in other things, especially when work is going great or going badly. When things are going great and you're working hard, that's all you want to do. I'm winning. I'm working hard at work. I'm getting my accounts are coming in. I'm raising my profile at work. People are complimenting me. I'm getting promoted. I'm going to maybe start my own thing someday. And you're feeling really good about yourself. So, there can be that obsession with this part that's going well, and you can start to neglect your wife over here. Or it can be the other thing. Things are going so badly, you feel like such a loser. You're like, how am I supposed to go and approach my wife with this later today? I feel like I can barely get out of bed now. I've been beaten down at work. I've been beaten down in traffic, and I come home and the bank account stinks and the team never wins, and I can't, even the things I used to do around the house, I can't do them anymore. And the guys start to slip away and get depressed, and they don't want to initiate with their wives any longer. Man, in that situation, ladies, you've got to come to the rescue of your husband in that regard. You've got to build him up. You've got to help him out. And also, you need to insist, ladies, on what is yours. If you're not getting it from your husband, you need to, first of all, watch out for him, because if he's not getting it from you, he's going to start to look somewhere else. And also look to yourself, because if you feel like you're not hearing from your husband as much, now all of a sudden that kind neighbor that walks his dog in front of your house every day starts to seem like a more important part of your life. If you feel that temptation come in, when your husband walks in the door, you need to say, you and I got some things to talk about. Maybe less to talk about. We got some things to do together. And sometimes men can just fail to show affection. This is what it is. Sometimes guys, because we tend to think of it as the more physical act, we tend to neglect the emotional part of it, which is such an important piece of it for the ladies. Where, you'll be, you're out back staining the deck and it's hot outside and, you're sweaty and gross and you come inside and there's your wife and she's been, scrubbing the sink out all day, and now you want to say, hey, how about we go upstairs and we have sex? She's like, no, get away from me. I thought you loved me. It's like, yeah, but fellas, you got to recognize who it is you're dealing with here. You can't treat her like, I'm going to go inside, I'm going to get a glass of water, and then I'm going to shower, and then I'm going to go see my wife. No, don't treat her like a to-do list. You need to treat her like somebody that you are trying to woo and trying to seduce and trying to want to make yourself desirable for her. And when guys fail to do that, sometimes they get pouty. And we can get pouty, fellas. We can. And say, fine, well, if you're not going to give me what I want, then let's see how you like it if I'm never nice to you. Yeah, that'll work. That's a really effective way to get her excited about you, isn't it? I just won't talk to her anymore. I'll give her the silent treatment, and then she'll be all over me. No, it won't work that way. No, sir. Well, I told her I loved her when we got married. I'll tell her again if I change my mind. That's what the ladies read those books about, right? That's what those guys are saying. The dark, tall, handsome man is like, I'll say I love you when I feel like it. No. You've got to learn what she needs and to give that to her. And so all of these things in various combinations can combine to have Christians who truly love each other and yet are not building the foundation upon which they're supposed to build a life together. And they come to church and they think that being spiritual is all about bowing your knees and worshiping and reading your Bible, and yet not realizing they're neglecting one of the most spiritual things the Bible gives you. I want you to look at verse 4 again and hear me when I say this very clearly. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. You have no right to withhold sex from your husband or your wife. You have no right. You don't get to do that. It's my body. No, it's not. No, it's not. Bodily autonomy. Leave that alone. What does the scripture say? Obviously, it's not talking about some sort of weird slavery thing. What it's talking about is if you've gotten married, there is an obligation between the two of you. And there are going to be days where you can't fulfill a person's needs, but it cannot be the pattern of your life or even a regular part of your life. Very often it is one person who decides, well, we've sort of outgrown that. And the other person is going, what am I supposed to say? If I say, no, we haven't, I sound like a little child. Or maybe he'll make fun of me. Or maybe she'll belittle me for not being spiritual like her. No, you have rights to one another. Let me read from the Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verses 12 and 16, which, if you ever think that the Bible is not in favor of marital love, go read that one again. You'll have some parts where you go, is that saying what I think it's saying? I promise you it's saying what you think it's saying. And if you think, well, that's inappropriate, you need to redefine inappropriate, because the Bible thinks that this is a good thing that should be talked about. Let me read you just one analogy from this. He compares her to all sorts of things, including a flock of goats at one point. But in Song of Solomon chapter 4, verse 12, listen to what, this is the bridal feast. This is the day that they're coming together. And the man says, a garden locked is my sister, my bride, a spring locked, a fountain sealed. So he's saying, my wife, or my bride at the time, they were getting married, she's like a garden full of wonderful things, and the gate is locked. Fellas, did you ever feel that way when you were dating the woman you were married to now? Oh, I saw it in your eyes. You don't want to say it out loud, but you know you felt that way. It's like, it's right there, and I can't have it. Well, it's in the Bible right there. That's exactly how the Lord wants you to feel, because when you finally come together in verse 16, he said, my wife is a garden locked. What does she say in verse 16? Let my beloved come into his garden and eat its choicest fruits. The wedding day, she's saying the garden is unlocked. The gates are open. Come on inside. It's comparing it to the Garden of Eden, that now you are welcomed into the most intimate of places where you can have your garden. Do you see how he says she is a garden, and then when they get married, she says, I am your garden. There is possession that comes involved there. And it goes both ways. Of course it does. That he is yours and she is yours. What is the verse we say it all the time? We apply it to Jesus, but it's about marriage in the Bible. I am my beloved's and he is mine. That's what Paul's talking about here. And in fact, the only circumstance Paul can conceive of when you should not be coming together sexually is when you mutually agree to fast for a time. Maybe one of the kids is very sick. Maybe one of the parents is in trouble, or you need money. And you say, we're going to fast, maybe from food, maybe from TV. We do that a lot at our house. Or maybe you say, we're going to fast from sex for an agreed upon amount of time, and instead we're going to pray. Now notice what he says about this. First of all, he says, together. You agree together. One person does not get to declare a sexual fast around the house. You don't have the authority to do that. You each have veto power over the other. And also, he said, for a limited time. For 1 year, we shall not. Paul goes, you are setting yourself up for trouble. If you say, it's like let's talk about regular fasting. When you fast from food, is that not the week where somebody brings donuts to work? I just went out and bought Chick-fil-A for everybody. I'm supposed to be fasting. God will understand. It's Chick-fil-A. It's tax write-off. It's fine. God counts it as tithing. It's okay. I had no idea how much Christians were into Chick-fil-A until I went to a Christian school, and it's like all they ever talked about. So learned a few things. But in the same way, if you say we're going to fast from each other sexually, that's going to be when you start noticing other women. That's going to be when that man starts making an advance on you, because the devil knows, and he's going to try to attack you in that way. So limited time, and then come together. You may have reached a point in your marriage where it is awkward to talk about this. I mean, maybe it's always been awkward for you to talk about this. It's never the easiest thing in the world, especially as you start talking about the problems that you're having in this regard with one another, because it can feel like an attack on the other person. But you need to be able to get over that and discuss that. I strongly encourage every couple in here, every husband and wife in here, to talk about these things, to talk about, are you happy? And you need to be prepared to hear the answer, no, I'm not. Without breaking down crying and saying, you hate me, or getting angry and saying, after everything I do for you. You need to have this conversation. And usually it'll go something like this, like, well, no, of course I am. I love you. And you say so many nice things, you know that there's a but coming. But what? And then express. It just seems like it's always so long in between. Or when we do it, it's It's peremptory. It's quick, and then there's no magic. There's no sparkle anymore. You've got to be able to talk about this. I want to spend a minute. I've referenced this a little bit, some already, but you got to be able to understand the person that you're dealing with. Remember when we went through the Love and Respect book together as a church? And we spent 6 weeks laughing our heads off together? We kept on calling out, this is what guys do, and this is what girls do. And when the guys get called out on what they do, we usually throw back our head and laugh. The girls usually bow their heads and blush until they catch the eye of somebody else. And they're like, okay, yeah, we do tend to do that. But it's true in this regard as well. That was much more about the emotional relationship with one another. But ladies, I'm gonna say something for the fellas, and you need to hear this. And I'll say something for you in just a minute. But you need to hear this, ladies. Sex for men is a very physical thing. It's physical for you too, but it is more so for him. When a man is desirous of his wife, it is like when he has been out in the sun all day, working in the yard, and comes inside and needs a glass of water. There is a physical urge and need that he needs to satisfy, and he wants to do that with you. Now, women can feel they can feel like this is not a good thing. They can feel like it's just, you've made it such a dirty thing. It's not a dirty thing. Where there's no love involved. All you want to do, I feel like a piece of meat, all you ever want to do is have sex and then be done. He doesn't just want to have sex. He wants to have it with you. And he wants to do it with you because that is the place that God has given him, and because he wants to maintain that relationship. You say you want it to be romantic, but for him, that is a romantic thing. It is the most romantic thing because he's not doing it with anybody else except you. But also there is a drive behind it that he can't help himself. And if you're constantly telling him no, you are putting him in a very uncomfortable and frustrating situation. And that anger is not going to be directed at himself. It's going to go towards you. So fellas, you need to be able to say every now and again, honey, I love you. I don't have time to put on a candlelit dinner tonight. I need you today. And ladies might say, that just seems so much. Take it as a compliment. I'll say it again. And say, wow, he can't even wait. Think about it like that instead of, well, all it is about the physical for you. No, but it's a lot of it. A lot of it is like that for him. Men are very visual. Men are very physical. And for when we are in that mood, ladies, it takes a long time to get in the mood, and it's a whole big production. And that's fine. That's how God made you, and it's wonderful. For guys, it comes on like a hurricane. And it's like right now, and I mean right now, I need you. And ladies, you need to be able to help him in that regard. You need to be a little give and a little take. He literally needs you. Because where else is he supposed to go? And you put him off enough times, he's going to stop asking. If he stops asking, those feelings are not going to go away. He's going to start looking for something else. Ladies, gentlemen, let me tell you about the ladies. For the ladies, the intimacy is paramount for them. Yes, there's a physical component to it. But for them, more than any of that, it is the closeness. It is the safety of it. It is the intimacy that he cares about me and only me. She wants to be romanced. She wants to feel like you are affectionate towards me. And that it's not that you're just doing this thing for yourself, but you care about me. This is why for women, the ramp up is often just as, if not more important than the actual act itself. Now, guys, we don't get that because, as I said, it happens faster for us. So we think, well, we're already there. Why don't we just go for it? Because for her, she wants to see, guys, when guys are committing sexual immorality, it's visual. They're going to go look at something that they shouldn't be looking at. When ladies are going to do something they shouldn't, they're going to go read a story. They're going to read it. It's going to build up. It's going to be a narrative. There's going to be a romance and a celebration. She wants that from you, and she needs that from you. So gentlemen, you need to find a way, not just to make this a physical thing only, but to make her feel safe, to make her feel wanted, to make her feel desirable, to go out of your way to do something. And I'll say this for you ladies too, another thing for the fellas. Sorry, I am one of those, so I just have to say it. If he tries, don't you punish him for it. He is not Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. He is not, your favorite character from Twilight. He is not one of those guys in those books. You married a bro. You should be glad that you married a bro. So, if he buys flowers and they're not your favorite color, don't throw them in the trash. Say, wow, he bought me flowers. He knows by now. Well, apparently not. We file needed information, and if it's not needed, flowers good. We got that written down. If he tries to cook something nice for you and it isn't very good, don't let that ruin the night. You say, he loves me. He's trying, and that's awesome. Think of him as cute. I can't believe he's trying to do that for me. It's better that way. You have to recognize each other. And I will throw this out there too. Gentlemen, it is also physical for your wife. And you need to be thinking about her in that regard And what can we be doing to make sure that this is something that is pleasurable for her, not just for me? It's another common thing that you hear. And ladies, you need to know that this is also intimate and emotional for your husband as well. Ladies want to be, open, not sexually, understand, but they want to be open and connected to everybody. Guys, maybe one, maybe two. You're his wife. You're going to be the one person in his world where he's going to be totally open and vulnerable to. And that includes the sexual act. Listen to me, ladies. If he opens himself up to you and you belittle him, if you make fun of him, if you use it as an opportunity to win an argument later, you are seeing to it that he is never going to try to connect with you emotionally in that regard ever again. This is why the Bible calls when we say have sex. In the Bible, they would say that they were naked. They saw each other's nakedness. They uncovered each other's nakedness. Because it's not just physical, it's emotional. It's spiritual. You are seeing me as I am. It's all on the table. There's nothing hidden anymore. And if he reveals that side to you and you punish him for it, he's going to learn that lesson. And God forbid, there'll be somebody that is willing to see him that way and not put him down. All these things, all these temptations that we face can come as a result of not satisfying one another in this marriage in this way. Pornography, yes, it's a terrible sin. But I'll tell you what, if you are seeing to it that you are both taken care of in this regard, pornography is going to seem cheap and useless. What do I want that for? I've got her. I've got him. Why would I want those things? And very often, as I said, a lot of times we identify the act of sin and say that was wrong, but never consider how these things might have come about. Emotional cheating. Here's a story you hear over and over again. Wife goes back to work. Husband's working. She's working. All of a sudden, she starts withdrawing. She's texting a lot at home, and it turns out she's found somebody at work that she talks to all the time. Some other guy that she's maybe not even flirting with, but there's an openness and a deepness between them. Where does that come from? Well, first of all, it comes from somebody committing sin, but it comes from a husband not taking care of his woman. Or the other way around. Are you seeing to each other's needs? Are you always griping at each other, always sniping, always arguing? The Bible calls us to be kind and patient with one another. Where does immodesty come from? You know what my mother told me one time? My mother told me one time that if you see a woman who is parading herself, especially posting pictures online that she shouldn't, she said, guaranteed that is a woman who is not being taken care of at home. Now, that doesn't, again, justify what she's doing, but you should be complimenting your ladies, fellas, so much that when somebody comes along and on the street says, hey, girl, you look fine, that she goes, yeah, like I don't hear that 10 times a day. You need to be looking after her, taking care of her, giving her that attention. And ladies, if you see yourself starting to seek attention from other men, that means there's a problem in your marriage. Especially as you ladies get older. Don't start chasing that from somebody else. Chase it from him. He wants to give it to you. And I'll tell you this, fellas. I hear this one. I told her she looked good, and all she said was, I know, I look terrible. You know I look terrible. Why does she say that, fellas? She wants to hear you say it again. She wants you to convince her that you do think that she is wonderful. So, convince her. And what about other distractions? Sometimes it's not even anything sexual. There's just work becomes that much more important. Hobbies become that much more important. Money becomes that much more important. It's because if we're not getting any, I'm not going to go commit a sin, but I'm not getting anything out of this. I've got to find a way to wall myself off, so I'll go find something else. All this comes out of temptation, which the Bible tells us to avoid that temptation by taking care of one another sexually in marriage. It's time for you to prioritize one another again. Do not withhold your effort or your affection from one another. If you are married to somebody, you need to be putting in the effort to stay attractive to that person. I don't just mean physically, but I at least mean physically. You need to do this. And your affection. You need to be making sure that you are giving those words of affirmation, those hugs and that kindness and those kind things that you do for one another. Because here's a story that happens an awful lot. Somebody gets married. They're together a long time, but then slowly seems they start to drift. And then one person, they get divorced, and then she goes off and she starts going to the gym, and she gets in great shape, and she gets a bunch of attention from a bunch of guys and goes and gets married right away. Or maybe he does. Now all of a sudden he'll put on a nice shirt, and he'll comb his own hair, and he'll put on some cologne, and he'll look nice. And you look at that, and you can say, good for you in one regard. Ladies, you will affirm each other even when you're being inappropriate in this regard. It's not good. Gentlemen can do the same thing, but I see it with the ladies more often. But what it is you say to yourself, well, where was that 5 years ago? So you were capable of getting in shape and dressing up nice and actually doing your hair and putting on your face once in a while. You never did it for him. So you got mad at him. Now you do it to get back at him and go find somebody else. Or you do it to her. You were never kind to her. You never held her. You never, wrote stupid poems for her. You never found a way to be romantic. And then as soon as she leaves, now you go do that for some other person. Shame on you. Shame on us for doing that. We can't allow this to happen in the church any longer. Put forth effort for one another. Think about what you were when you first got married to the other person. Now we get older, and it's not always going to be like you were when you were 19, 20, 25, whatever it was. But fellas, if your woman fell in love with you and married you because you were strong, you were capable, and you took life by the horns, and you led her well, and you were kind to her, but you weren't, just a pushover for her, and you were going to go take life by the horns, and then as soon as you get married, all you do is sit down in your chair and watch Fox News all night long, and you turn into a big slob, and now you don't even want to fight with her anymore. You just go, oh yeah, yes dear, or whatever. Of course she's not going to like that. Of course your sex life is going to suffer. Get it back, friend. Get back up and start acting that way again. You're going to make her so happy. Ladies, if when you got married, you used to take care of yourself, you used to make sure you looked cute every day, you were bubbly and you were happy and you were sweet and you were always doing sweet things, and now he comes home from work and you haven't been to the gym in 10 years, and you've just wear your scrubs every day, and you don't really care what you look like anymore, and he walks in the door and you say, hey, you're supposed to take out the garbage yesterday. Well, of course your sexual relationship is going to atrophy. Go back and do the former things, Revelation chapter 2. And again, I'll never be able to get back to the way I was. You need to put forth the effort as an act of love to your spouse and an act of protection against sexual immorality. Because if you loved him enough to marry him, there will be somebody else that will love him enough to try to take him from you. And if you thought she was that great that you wanted to commit yourself to her forever, there will be other guys that will feel the same way. They would never do that. Well, you can make sure by looking after one another. Pursue one another. Chase after each other. We don't want to be the place in the church where something terrible like adultery happens and we coddle the one who was hurt. Meanwhile, this guy over here, he's long gone and says, yeah, you can hug and kiss her all you want. I know what was going on in that house, and I'm not going back to that anymore. And if that's religion, I don't want it. Christian marriages are not celibate. Not even for a long time, but to regularly come together and take care of each other. Hebrews 13:4, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. In the church, we need to insist upon and make time for sexual relations in marriage. Maybe you reach the point in your life where you have to schedule it. That doesn't feel very romantic. Well, learn to make it romantic. If you want to make it romantic, schedule a day, and then pursue them on a day when you didn't schedule it. Then it becomes romantic. I just don't have time with the kids and that, then you are too busy. If you're too busy for this, you're too busy. If you're too tired for this, you're too tired. I'm just not interested in them anymore. Then you need to get back together and find a way to stir up that fire, because you are not godly if you are walking this way. But I go to church, I take care of the children's ministry classes, and I tithe, and I read the Bible, and I pray. Good. The Lord has also told you in that word to see to it that you give to each other what is owed. In your house, take care of your spouse actively. This is too important to act like it is unimportant. And if there is ever a commandment that God gave us that we can be excited to follow, might as well be this one. Amen. Amen. All right, well, let's keep going. Verse 6. That's going to be most of our time for the day, but the rest of this will contribute to it as well. Verse 6. Now as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that all were as I myself am. But each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and to the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn. And the ESV adds there with passion. It literally just says it is better to marry than to burn. Some people think that means than to burn in hell. But I think in the context it's pretty clear. He's talking about being burned up with temptation while you're trying to be obedient to the Lord. So verse 6, he says, as a concession, not a command, I say this. There is a debate about, is Paul referring to what he just said or what he's about to say next? I think it's most likely he's referring to what he said before, which is about that mutually agreed fast from sex. And he's saying, look, I'm not even telling you got to do this. There is no forced fasting in that regard in the Lord's church. But you got to remember the question here relates to celibacy. Is it good for us to be celibate for the Lord? And Paul is going to say, well, yes, it is good, but it is not the only good thing, and it's not a better thing than this. So now he addresses those who were single. And Paul himself was single. There are some who believe that Paul was married, but I will just tell you there is not a shred of biblical evidence that he was. There are some who say, well, for Paul to be on the Sanhedrin Council, then he would have had to be married. To which I say, Paul was never on the Sanhedrin Council. He was carrying coats for the Sanhedrin Council. He was a page, like a congressional page, just kind of carrying stuff for him. He could have been and then maybe been divorced, who knows, but the Bible just doesn't say that. So I'm not going to argue from silence there. But he says, I'm single, and he can see the advantages of being single. He says that is the gift that God gave him, which is I can be single without being burned up by lust. Jesus said something similar in Matthew 19, verse 12. But what Paul says is, I have this gift, some people have another gift, meaning it is equally as spiritual and righteous to be married as it is to be single. That's how the Lord created us in most cases. And in chapter 9, verse 5 of this book, he's going to say that Peter was married, and the other apostles would take their wives on their missionary journeys. So he's saying, yeah, it's a good thing, but it's not the only good thing. It's not even the best thing. And verse 9 gives us the same thing that we saw before, that, well, should I get married? He goes, if you can't control yourself, then yeah, you should. If you can't avoid lust, if you can't avoid fornication, then yes, you should get married. We cannot allow ourselves to fall prey to temptation while we are single. Now, we have gotten into a bad habit in our culture, and this has seeped into the church as well, where we are advocating for marriage to be delayed longer and longer and longer. And it has been happening. And there's usually two reasons that are given. Number one is for your career. You need to get your career under control first. And the second reason is, well, you're just not mature enough. You're not ready to get married. You got to make sure that you are mature enough to get married. Well, what that has led to is we're constantly beating that drum. It has led to a generation and multiple generations of people who focus on their career and their self-development to the exclusion of marriage, family, and all that. And we wonder why people are not getting married. It's because we've been telling them your career is more important. We're telling them, build a life by yourself before you join with somebody else, when in actuality it is much harder to do that. This is not what the Bible teaches us. And this is what happens. We tell them you have to wait. We are saying during your most hormonally driven years, gentlemen, when your testosterone is at the highest it'll ever be, when you are just, shaking because you need this, those are the years where you should wait to get married. Is that how God created us? Kind of sounds strange when you say it that way, isn't it? This has led to the proliferation of pornography, of hookup culture, and later on to divorce. Because he said, well, what are we supposed to do during all of our teens and 20s? If we can't do this, well, people are going to find a way, especially if they don't honor the Lord. But even if they do, Paul even says there's some times, and most times I would say, where you just can't control yourself, because God never intended you to control yourself like that. He intended you to be married. And what happens if we teach ourselves that I do not need another person to satisfy my sexual desires, or if I'm going to just pick and choose and move on to the next one over and over again, then you get married. You expect that person to stay faithful? They've separated their career, their self-development, and even their sexuality from their marriage. Then what is left in this thing? God created the sex drive, among other things, to drive us towards maturity and marriage. Have you ever seen parents when your young son notices a girl for the first time, and all of a sudden he's combing his own hair? All of a sudden I don't mind putting on a shirt with a collar on it. You couldn't pay me to wear a collared shirt when I was a kid, man. I wore black band shirts, jeans, studded belts, and etnies every day for like 5 years, man. But you know what? You get a little older and you realize, oh, that's a young lady that I think I might be interested in. All of a sudden, how do you tie a tie exactly? Guys do this because that's what happens. And it is a small example of what God intends. If you are just burning up in your flesh with a desire for a woman, which is not a bad thing, it is a good thing. What does it do? I want to be with this woman. How do I be with this woman? I have to marry this woman. I'm not ready to marry this woman. I better get ready to marry this woman. What do I got to do? I got to grow up. I got to be a man. I got to be a person that is grown up. I got to get a job. I got to be able to provide. I've got to be the kind of person that she would be interested in. It pushes you to grow up so that you can be married. And we say things like, that is just such a carnal way to look at marriage. It's the biblical way to look at marriage. It's the proper way to look at marriage. Proverbs 18:22 says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. So if you're out there wondering, how am I supposed to resist this sexual temptation? You need to start thinking about getting married. That's the Bible's prescription for you. Now you might say to me, that's easier said than done. I agree. It can be hard to find a wife, find a husband, especially a Christian wife or husband. But if you have that as your thought and as your thinking, not I want to be with somebody, but I want to find someone to marry and raise a family with, you start thinking outward. You start thinking about, what do I need to do to prepare myself for that? And you start growing up. You start managing your money a little better. You start providing for a place to live, gentlemen. Ladies, you start thinking, what kind of qualities is a man looking for? Have I developed those qualities? Am I good with children? Have I learned how to be kind to one another? Or do I have a flaring temper that I've got to work on? For every one of us, we start taking care of our appearance and the way that we dress to one another. Well, that's just so superficial. You can say that all you want. But if you're looking for a husband or a wife, that is not the attitude that's going to help you any, I'll tell you that. You ever heard guys say things like that? It's like, she should just love me the way I am. Oh, you always want to go after the big muscly guys that are all handsome. What about me? What's wrong with me? It's like, if you can scream into the void all you want, friend, but it's not going to happen. Like when ladies say, I'd never marry a man that cares about a woman's physical appearance. Maybe you should have stopped that sentence early. I will never marry a man, because you need to look after yourself. Can we be honest in the church? Can we be real with each other? And I'll tell you what, I see this happen in the church, and I love it. When we come together and the older men are instructing the younger men and the older women are instructing the younger women. When I was a youth pastor, these guys would come in and I would just teach them little things. I remember one time a kid came in and he had dressed up that day and he was all proud of himself, but his tie bar was all the way down here. I said, hey, dude, you look sharp. He goes, thanks. Let me teach you something. All right. Second and third button. There you go. Oh, okay. I say, hey, how are you, man? And they kind of give me these little limp fish things. I say, no. Put it right here. Squeeze tight and just pump once or twice. Now do it again. And guys do that for each other. I imagine ladies do the same things with one another. I can only speak to the male experience. Sorry about that. But we see this here too. Oh, I'm just so lonely. I need to find a woman. Okay, well, dude, you ain't even got a job. Go get a real job. Get a real house. I went out on a date with that girl. She didn't like me. Well, what'd you wear? I wore this. Well, what's wrong with you? Of course she didn't like you. She shouldn't care about that. Shouldn't isn't going to get you a wife. Shouldn't isn't going to get you a husband. Grow up. Be who the Lord has called you to be. And become desirable to somebody else. Of course, if we're just going to continue to encourage and permit sex before marriage, this trend is never going to stop. But in the church, it has to be different. We encourage maturity from men and women. We encourage abstinence before marriage and marriage as the solution for our youth. My wife and I have said many times, we would like to raise our children to the place that when they graduate high school and they leave, they are ready to live their own life and to be married. Does that mean that they're going to get married that week? No, but we want to do everything we can that it is not just the farthest possible thing that my 18-year-old son could ever attract a woman or to be able to provide for a woman or know what needs to happen, or for my daughter, same thing. Is that so difficult? You're not just raising children. You raise children into adulthood. And we need to make sure that we are teaching this and helping each other along. This is why these men's groups and women's groups are so important. All right, verse 10. We'll finish it up here. To the married... So we talked about to the married before, now to the single, and now to the married. I give this charge, not I, but the Lord, meaning Paul is about to quote from Jesus here. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife. So again, you've got a both and there. To the rest I say, I, not the Lord. This is not saying that what Paul's about to say is optional. What he's saying is, I'm not quoting from Jesus anymore. I'm speaking as the Apostle Paul again. That if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever, and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife. That doesn't mean he's being saved. It means he's being sanctified. And the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. There's your reassurance if you've ever lost a child, by the way. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So pertaining to divorce here, Paul echoes Jesus. And the Christian teaching on divorce is rather simple, although there are some important exceptions. Christians don't get divorced. We don't do that. He's quoting from Jesus, Matthew 19. I'll read verse 6 and then verse 9, but it's a longer passage. Jesus said, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. In verse 9, And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. Both men and women are told not to divorce. And if they do, he tells them to seek reconciliation or to stay single. You will find that most of the commandments in the Bible about divorce are trying to prevent us from leaving one person for another person. Well, if I get divorced, then it's okay. No, it's not. God sees that. He says you need to seek reconciliation. That's always the goal. We have the ministry of reconciliation, the Bible says. Repentance is the goal. We need to, if we can, restore marriages that have been broken. And I have seen it happen, and it is a glorious thing to see happen when couples who have been divorced are reunited and brought back together. It's great to see. Now, what some people try to do, and I won't get too far off into this, but I wanted to mention it. Some people, if they don't have biblical reasons, will try to invent or provoke biblical reasons for divorce. Why should I divorce him? Well, I'm just tired of living with him, but he's not done anything wrong. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to yell at him, scream at him, annoy him, get in his face until he hits me. Now I can leave. Now I can say he was an abuser. That happens. Gentlemen will do the same thing. If they see that their wife is drifting towards somebody else, they'll let it happen so that they can leave her. Or at least we try to manipulate in the church just so that we can get out. Look, God's not interested in your drama. Stay married. It's not complicated. If you married somebody, stay married. This is another building block upon which, if we're going to build proper sexual culture, we don't get divorced. We don't do this. And it needs to be that simple in the church. There are, of course, some exceptions that the Bible gives. But before we even get into any of those, we just need to have, as a baseline, we don't go anywhere. Paul gives this other lesson too. That, first of all, while we should not marry unbelievers, because you are going to be disjointed in the most important part of your life. But sometimes it happens. Either a couple gets married while they're unsaved, and one of them gets saved along the way. Or somebody does what they're not supposed to do, and you marry an unbeliever. That is not an excuse for divorce. Paul says if you marry an unbeliever, and they will stay married to you, you should stay married. I have heard people say, well, we're not really compatible anymore because we're not married, or we're not both Christians. Doesn't matter. God doesn't honor marriages between... That whole thing we say, does God honor that marriage? If the rules of the Bible are, if you're married, you're married. And he doesn't want you to get divorced. I had somebody tell me one time, well, when we got married, she loved Jesus and she loved the Lord, but now she just doesn't care about the Bible anymore, doesn't want to go to church anymore. She's really not even the same person. So if she was never really born again, it's like I married her under false pretenses, so God says I can get divorced from her. No, he doesn't. Because God tells you to stay married to an unbeliever that doesn't mind being married to a Christian. So how much more a Christian who might not even be walking in obedience to the Lord? He says you need to consider the sanctifying effect of the gospel upon them and upon your children. You should consider children in regards to divorce. That's the whole push. No, I've got to do what's best for me. Well, if you've never seen this before, take a look online sometimes at the bitterness in the heart of Gen Z millennials and all those other younger generations. For the parents that did get divorced at amazing rates, and the anger that is in their heart that my parents ripped my life apart when I was a kid. It's not a good thing. We shouldn't be doing this. Peter said the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 3. He said, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Peter said, imagine, in Rome, there's a lot of Christian or women becoming Christians who are married to Romans, to pagans. Should I divorce him? He goes, no. Live like a Christian woman ought to live. Be like a Christian wife. And convince him. He didn't say get in his ear all day and nag him and wear him down. You need to get saved or you're going to hell. He said, what do? Start submitting to your husband. Start loving your husband. Start giving him his marital due. Start looking after those kids, respecting him. And he's going to say, what is this religion that makes women like this? Fellas, you can flip that around for you too. My wife doesn't care about Jesus. She doesn't care about the Lord. Well, you start loving her like Christ loved the church, giving her marital due. You start leading her like a godly man. You step up and show strength and provide for her and protect her and love her in the name of Christ. She will follow you. We need to do this. Now, there is, of course, in this passage the possibility that one is abandoned by an unbeliever, that they divorce you. What does Paul say? He says, you're free. Somebody just walks out on you and there's no hope of reconciliation. That happens. Divorce is a mess. God hates it because it makes a mess. And it's very hard to look at a situation and even say what to do in some of these cases. But Paul says sometimes people walk out on you, especially for religious reasons. He goes, and there's nothing you can do about that. You're free as the Lord is concerned. So then, it means as far as the Christians go, we don't have irreconcilable differences. We don't do that. That is not a biblical reason to be divorced. I'm just so unhappy. Then fix it. Fix it, Felix. If you don't know what that is, it's okay. You don't need to worry about it. If you're so upset all the time and all we do is fight, well, stop that. Don't do that. So I should just be miserable all the time? Either that or you can go back and fix it. Work on it. That's going to take a long time. Yeah, it took you a long time to make this mess. Go back and fix the mess. Reconcile. You're going to trust that Jesus Christ is going to reconcile you between heaven and earth, and you can't reconcile between the man you married or the wife you married? Doesn't work that way. There are instances when divorce must happen. I kind of tend to think of it as we will cross those bridges when we get to them. It's because of the hardness of heart we have to have it. But for now, let's just get the principle in our minds. We stand firm on our vows. Because if you know that your marriage is not going to end, you'll fix it. If you know that you are stuck on this desert island with this person, you might as well get along. Because we'll do this. If you're married, and when I first got married, I thought to myself, a godly Christian man will see to it that every conflict is resolved to the satisfaction of the Lord our God. And what that resulted in is a lot of 4-hour discussions about whether or not you should keep bread in the refrigerator. No, you shouldn't, is the answer to that. Or which condiments will we buy name brand for, and which ones will we? And I promise you, we had long discussions about this. Because I thought that's what husbands should do, is lead until we can fix it. But as we got married a little longer, we started just saying stuff like, who cares? Yeah, we're mad. We won't be mad tomorrow. It's just, are we really going to make this such a big deal? Because you know that, we're going to be married for 20 years. Are we going to be mad every week for 20 years? Or are we just going to learn to let some stuff go? And sometimes if you've got a big conflict, but you know the other person's not going anywhere, that's enough just to let it go. If we're going to hold up marriage as the solution, we cannot allow it to be destroyed so easily. So marriage is the solution. Well, marriage stinks. No. Marriage without divorce. I would never do that. That's what the disciples said, right? Maybe we shouldn't just get married then. Because they were young guys, and they're like, I don't want to get stuck to some crazy woman my whole life. And that's kind of was Paul's attitude, I guess. But it's not just abstaining from sexual immorality. It's marriage, but it's marriage without the possibility of divorce, so that you work on it and fix it. Well, how do we avoid those kind of fights? You stay loving each other. And I don't just mean sending Valentine's cards. I mean sexually loving one another for your whole life. The Christian view of sex is not that it is a higher calling to be celibate, but that sex is a gift that is given and meant to be exercised to the fullest in marriage. To the extent with which the Lord tells you to abstain from sexual activity before you get married, inversely, that is how much the garden opens up when you are married. So let's not cultivate this strange, monastic, pseudo-spiritual, sexless Christianity where you leave each other open for temptation. God's system of marriage, fidelity, faithfulness, that's the solution. But it's got to start in the church. We've got to live this out here before we start judging other people. I'll remind you again, withholding yourself from your spouse is a form of sexual immorality that no one else sees but you. So first of all, you should probably cultivate some friendships around here where you are willing to talk to each other about stuff like that. But also, you need to recognize that you can't say, I'm serving Jesus and I love him with all my heart, and you are not taking care of your spouse. Doesn't matter, my sickness, or my mental struggles, you'd be surprised how many of those things will go away if you start taking care of one another, actually. We're just too angry at each other. We're too upset all the time. If you are not having sex with your spouse, you are going to fight all the time. Or you're going to reach some sort of bland, boring way of going through life that neither one of you is going to be happy with. And then you start watching a bunch of romantic movies, and you start, flirting with people at the grocery store to get a little excitement back. Protect one another with the Word of God solution. Who are you learning these things from? Who do you learn about sex from? Podcasts? You learn it from TV? Learn it from TikTok, God help us? Do you learn it from those books that you read? Do you learn it from TV? Where do you get this? Do you learn it from the knuckleheads at the job that have been divorced 4 times? All right, man, here's what you do. I got to tell this story. I was listening to, I think it was a podcast one time, and this guy had written a book on men and marriage. Oh, cool. But come to find out, he had been divorced 4 times. And the last time had been while he was in the process of writing the book that he was promoting. To which he said, gave him a very broad range of experience to talk about relationships. To which I say, I don't want to learn basketball from the guy that got cut from the team 4 times. I want to learn it from Michael Jordan, that won 6 championships. Learn it from Jesus, friends. Don't want to get this stuff from somewhere else. It's got to start in the church. Learn from the Lord. You will find that your needs will be satisfied. Your love together will only grow. Delight yourself in the gifts of God, for they are only and ever for your good. And I say, if there is ever a commandment that we could delight to obey, it must be this one.